大家好。谢谢，谢谢。That is all the Chinese I know. Thank you for being here. May I see a show of hands? How many of you are members of Bliss Wisdom? Thank you for being members of Bliss Wisdom. And thank you for being born. Thank you for taking the human experience, which involves suffering. It involves aging, disease, dying, loss. And it also involves beauty and joy and healing and the opportunity to love, the opportunity to serve, the opportunity to grow, and to be part of something, as you are, part of Bliss Wisdom, that is serving the good of the world in so many profound ways, is a privilege, and I thank you for it. As you were told, and some of you know, I was born into an ice cream family. My father and my uncle founded Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors, which became the world's largest ice cream company. And I'm an only son. I have sisters but no brothers. And my father assumed that I would succeed him in the business. He trained me, he groomed me for that from my earliest childhood. And the company was incredibly successful in financial terms. So my dad thought, understandably, that he was offering me something that most, probably every young man in the country would have been very grateful for that opportunity. And I did feel grateful that he trusted me that much. And I loved to eat ice cream as a kid. But things happened. First, my uncle Bert Baskin, my dad's partner and brother-in-law, co-owner of the company, died of a heart attack at the age of 54. He was a very big guy. He ate a lot of ice cream. And he died at 54. It's young. And when he died, I asked my father, do you think there could be a connection between the amount of ice cream my uncle would eat and his fatal heart attack? And my father looked at me and said, absolutely not. No. His ticker just got tired and stopped working. And the energetic message, the message that came through those words was, don't ever ask that question again. And I can understand why my father would not have wanted to even consider the possibility that there might be a connection. He had, by that time, manufactured and sold more ice cream than any human being who had ever lived on this planet. He didn't want to think. He couldn't bear to think that the family product might be harming anyone, much less that it could have contributed in any way to the death of his partner, my uncle. But I felt, though I understood why my father could not consider that possibility, I wanted to honestly question, was there a connection? And the more I looked into it, the more I began to think, yes, there is a connection. A single ice cream cone isn't going to kill anybody or hurt anybody, but the more ice cream you eat, my uncle did eat a lot, the more likely you are, this is the medical reality, to have a heart disease or a heart attack. So that was a moment of awakening for me. It opened my eyes to something. And then another moment came. At that time, in all of the Baskin-Robbins stores, and there were thousands and thousands of them, behind the counter, there were photographs, murals, large photographs of beautiful cows grazing in pastures, Wisconsin pasture land, Holstein and Guernsey cows, beautiful, beautiful cows, contented, lots of grass, lots of space, sunshine. The feeling that came across from those photographs was of harmony with nature. The animals seemed happy and well cared for. But one day, I went with my father to the dairy where most of Baskin-Robbins' milk products and dairy products came from, the actual dairy, the Central Valley of California. And it was a very, very different situation there. The cows were confined in a feedlot. There was no grass anywhere. They were standing in mud and in their own waste. And they were so crowded, so densely packed together, that they could barely move around at all. And when I went up to one of them, I was a child then, and I went up to one of them just to say hello, maybe pet it, say, make a connection, and it bolted. It jumped back. It was afraid. I had goodwill in my heart, but it was afraid of me, very afraid. And I thought, what has happened to this cow at the hands of human beings that it's afraid of a human being? Cows are by nature docile, patient, peaceful animals. But this cow and all of them there were so anxious, so stressed, so frightened, because the conditions were so bad. And the next time I was in a Baskin-Robbins store and saw the pictures, I knew they weren't telling the truth. And I began to feel that selling ice cream and making money, doing that, which my father did, and which he wanted me to do, was not the way I wanted to live my life. But I wanted to respect him. And these were his wishes for me, very, very strongly. So what was I to do? I talked to him. I tried to talk to him. I said, Dad, we live in a different world now than when you grew up. Today, the environment is deteriorating under the impact of human activities, and dairy production and meat production, industrial animal agriculture is a major contributor to that. When you grew up, we didn't know that there was any connection between ice cream and the high sugar content of it and the high saturated fat content of it and heart disease, but we are learning that there is a connection. We live under a nuclear shadow now, where at any moment something horrible, unspeakable could happen. Do you see, Dad, I said, that for me, feeling these issues, these topics, these problems so deeply, it wouldn't make sense for me. It wouldn't be an adequate response to these issues to follow in the ice cream business and invent a 30-second flavor. But he didn't understand. He wanted very, very much for me to do that. But I was pulled in a different direction, and I had to go deal with this conflict. And the company was extremely successful. My father was a billionaire. And if I did what he expected me to do and wanted me to do, my financial security was set for life. But there are some things more important than money. And caring for one another, caring for the earth, living with respect for ourselves and each other is one of them. I eventually told my dad I wasn't going to do what he expected and wanted. He was very hurt. He was very angry at me. He did not deal with his anger in a very healthy way. For some years, we didn't talk. There was a lot of tension, but I had made my choice, and I felt very sorry. I tried to be as respectful as possible while doing what I did. It was a very painful time, I'm sure for my dad, and it was for me as well. But I had to do this because I was saying yes to a possibility. And as I think you know, I moved with my wife to a little island. I told my dad I didn't want to have a trust fund. I didn't want to have any access to his fortune, his money. I made a choice for integrity, to be an ethical relationship to the choice I made. I didn't want to ever depend on his financial achievements at all, zero. So my wife and I moved to this little island off the coast of British Columbia, Canada. We built a one-room log cabin, very small, primitive, and we lived there for 10 years, growing most of our own food. We didn't really know how to grow food when we started, but we learned through trial and error, lots of errors. Once we decided to plant cabbages, and we had never grown cabbages. Neither of us had actually grown food before. But we were out there, and we depended on what we could grow, so we better make it work. We got some little seed packets, and they said on the packages to plant the seeds in rows every 18 inches, and rows 3 feet apart. And I thought, this idea of row crops, straight lines, that makes sense when you have tractors and industrial farming, but we're just going to be growing things by hand. We got a shovel, you know, and a rake and a hoe. It's just all hand work. So we don't need to plant in rows. That sounds like the city to me. 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, you know, everything's straight lines. And I wanted to be more in nature, so I spread the seed all over the place. And I thought, well, I've never seen a cabbage plant, but I'm planting all of these seeds at once, so whatever comes up a lot of in a few days, those will be the cabbage plants. I thought that was pretty clear. And then I would thin them out so they'd have enough space, and we'd be in business. Well, the next day, little sprouts started to appear. I didn't know how long a cabbage seed needed to germinate. It needs about a week. But the next day, little seeds started to appear, and I thought, well, those must be the cabbages. So anything else that came up, we pinched them out and thinned out around these little plants so they had enough space, and we watered them and chanted over them and thought they would, and then they started to grow really, and I didn't understand where the cabbage, the head would appear, and I really didn't think it was under the ground, but I didn't see it anywhere as these plants were growing. Then I noticed that these plants looked looked exactly like a bunch of plants that were growing outside the garden. And I thought, this is amazing. We have found a piece of land where wild cabbages grow. Because, look, they look exactly the same. And I thought this was thrilling. And I kept waiting for the cabbage, the green head, the round thing to appear, like I had bought it in a supermarket, you know, it would grow on the plant. And as you probably can guess, it never did. And we grew a great crop of thistles. And that's how ignorant we were. But we intended to learn. So we didn't have cabbages that year, but we learned from our mistakes. And I've often thought, we're human, we will make mistakes. The important thing is to make mistakes in the direction of your intention, in the direction of your aspiration, and to learn from them. So you don't continually make the same mistake over and over and over again. You learn from it and you grow. And then you can make new mistakes and learn new things in the direction of your highest aspiration, of the ideals or the values that live at the center of your being and get expressed in your love, in your caring, and in your commitment. We were trying to weave ourselves back into the web of life, to send our roots down into the earth, to feel ourselves as part of the living earth, the living web of life. And we wanted to feel ourselves as part of it. I didn't grow up feeling part of it. I grew up in a very wealthy family. I used to jokingly say that in my family, roughing it meant that room service was late. But now we were really, really roughing it. And we depended on the earth to live. And we made it work. Hard work. We did a lot of yoga. We did a lot of meditation. We were trying to learn how to live in harmony with this beautiful planet. And I was moving away from a value system in which money was the measure of everything. I used to be a little embarrassed when my father would judge people not by their character, not by whether they were kind, not by whether they did good in the world, but just by how much money they had. And that's a sickness that our society has accepted as normal, but I did not want to accept it, and I wanted to protest against it. So we lived very differently. Eventually, I wrote a book, Diet for a New America, some of you know about it, about how our food choices affect our health, affect the earth, affect the animals, affect our spirits. I was very interested in what food choices would be healthiest for the body, the mind, but also would open the space for meditation, would create the clearest mind, the clearest heart, the most emotional peace, inner peace. And I thought eating the flesh of animals whose lives have in industrial meat production have been nightmares of suffering cannot contribute to inner peace, cannot contribute to the well-being of the human heart. And I was reading in the medical literature about how heart disease is related to meat consumption, and many forms of cancer are related to meat consumption. And I thought, we don't need to do this. We don't need to treat animals with contempt so that we can have cheap industrial factory farm meat. We don't and we shouldn't do that. My father, meanwhile, was getting on with his life. He eventually sold Baskin Robbins, became a billionaire. He stayed on with the company as president, chairman of the board. His own health was deteriorating badly. And when he was 70 years old, he had diabetes that was so severe The doctors were talking about a possible amputation of a foot or even a leg, possible blindness. His blood pressure was so high, he had to take 10 very large pills. He called them horse pills every day, and they had serious side effects that he disliked very strongly. But the doctors told him he'd have to take these pills for the rest of his life. His weight was a big problem. He was very ill. And I had written Diet for a New America. I had sent him a copy, an autographed copy, but I knew he didn't read it. However, shortly after the book had come out, he went to see his cardiologist, who was at the time the highest priced cardiologist in California, and a very, very prestigious physician, who did something remarkable. He leveled with my father. He said to him, "Mr. Robbins, at this point, you're a very sick man. And the best we can do for you in medicine is to try to juggle your medications and try to control some of the side effects that are bothering you, and try to make your few remaining years more comfortable. But," he said, "if you're willing to make major changes in how you live, there might be a different outcome for you." And my father was scared, and he said, "Well, what changes do you mean?" And the doctor reached back and took a copy of my book and handed it to him and said, "You should read this book." Now, the doctor did not know that the John Robbins who had written the book was related to the Irv Robbins, his patient, the Baskin Robbins. Because I only mention it once in the book, and he hadn't seen that. My dad, of course, knew, but he didn't tell him. He just took the book, and my dad told me about this moment later, and I wish I could have been a fly on the wall and looked and seen the look on my dad's face when this happened, because it's such a karmic collision. Here is, from my father's point of view, the high priest of Western medicine, someone he reveres, whose opinion he will follow, he's put his life in this man's hands. And this man is recommending that he read the book written by his maverick son that rejected his life work. It's a strange moment, and a very intense moment for my dad, I'm sure. But he really was concerned about his failing health, and he began to read the book, and he began to make changes, and then he got results. And then he made more changes and got more results, and more changes and more results, and pretty soon he no longer needed insulin shots for his diabetes. He no longer needed diabetic pills. His diabetes was in complete remission. No longer any conversation about amputation or blindness. His diabetes was cured. His high blood pressure, which he was taking these large pills for and had been told he'd have to take for the rest of his life, went away. He had normal blood pressure now without medication. He lost a lot of the weight that he needed to lose. His golf game improved about 8 strokes. He was getting tremendous results. And he phoned me. And he said, "Johnny, you're not going to believe this. It's incredible. It's amazing. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It turns out you were right." And I began to feel that, because I had disappointed my dad so deeply at one point, but in the longer run, I had been able to give him something perhaps more meaningful than simply doing what he expected would have given him. And we started to become friends again and connect in different ways. He lived 20 more healthy years. And we became closer. I was, he said, the only unconditional relationship in his life. What that meant was he was surrounded by people who did what he asked, and he paid them. He had staff everywhere. Even my sisters and my mother were playing for his money. But with me, if I called him on the phone and said, "Dad, how you doing? I love you, what's going on?" he knew I wasn't fishing for a check. He knew I wasn't, because I never accepted that. So he began to trust me in ways that he didn't trust anybody else, and confided in me things he didn't share with anybody else. And I was beginning to feel that I definitely gave him something more important than I would have if I did the expected thing. Once he said to me, "You know what bothers me the most about you, Johnny?" I said, "No, tell me." He said, "Everybody else has their price except you. Everybody else I've met has their price, but you." And I said, "Dad, I will take that as a compliment, even though I'm not sure how you meant it." And I did. Eventually, when my dad was in his early 90s, he became ill, and he was dying, and he was in the hospital in intensive care. And I was sitting with him. He had a morphine drip. It was an injection. He could squeeze a button, and it would inject a very strong morphine painkiller into his veins. He was in a lot of pain. And they had it set up so it could only deliver the medication every 15 minutes. I guess they felt that if he got it more frequently, he might go into a coma and die. And so that's the limit. And you could see it as when he got the med into it, the pain med into his veins, he would relax. But then over the course of 15 minutes, he'd get more stressed and anxious. Obviously, the pain was coming back. And he'd try and squeeze the thing, and it wouldn't deliver, and then finally it would after 15 minutes, and he'd feel better. It was poignant to watch. I wished I could have done more to help him. And at a certain point, I said to him, "Less pain." And he said, "Yeah, less pain." I said, "Yeah, less pain and more love." And he said, "Less pain." And I said, yeah, less pain and more love. Less pain, and more love. Well, at a certain point, he got his dose came through, and he sort of fell asleep, or he closed his eyes. He seemed to be asleep, and I thought I just wanted to express my love, and I kissed him on the forehead. And he reacted this way. He like, "Oh, what was that? What was that?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Dad. I did not mean to cause you stress. That was me. I just kissed you on the forehead." "Why would you do that? Why?" "Because I love you." You've always been about love, haven't you?" "No, I haven't." Now, it's true. Once, a few years earlier, before that, my grandchildren had been born, and they were twins, and they were born extremely premature, which is not a good thing. And when they had major special needs, and my parents visited us, and we were singing to these little babies, and holding them and singing to them. And my father said to me at that time, "Johnny, do you think all children need love, or just children like this?" And I said, "Dad, I do think all children need love. And he said, that's a new concept for me. And then on his deathbed, he said to me, you've always been about love. I haven't. I didn't believe in it. I thought it was a weakness. People take advantage of you. You let them in, too close, you don't know what they're going to do. And I said, I know, Dad, that's how you've lived. And he said, but you care about people, don't you? I said, yeah, sometimes. I try to. And then he nodded. And then he got some more of his pain met, and he kind of drifted off, and I kissed him on the forehead again. And this time, he went like this. Oh, there sure is a lot of love here. And I said, yeah, less pain. And he said, and more love. And we went back and forth, saying together, less pain and more love. And then he fell asleep. And those were the last words he ever spoke. He died that night. And I felt so grateful, and I still feel so grateful that in the long run, I was able to love him in a way that despite our differences and despite the fact that I had disappointed him so tremendously at one point, I could give him something more important than that. And it was a lesson for me that when you honor your integrity, when you honor your deep heart, when you honor what you're called to do, who you're called to be, by your soul, by your highest vision of what is possible for you, for human beings, for this earth, for this living community, the earth community, you align yourself with forces of great power, forces far more powerful than $1 billion, far more important for the future of this planet and for the future of our species and for the future of each of our spirits. And you attune to that. You become a vehicle for it. You become filled with it. You become a channel for its expression. You become a statement of caring and compassion. Because that's what's in the human heart at its root. And a lot of us live with a hunger for compassion, for caring in our lives. And some of us feel that it's a weakness, like my dad did. But I think it's a strength. I think it matters how much you love and how you love, and I think it matters more than how much money you have or how much money you make. And I think that most of us actually know that at some level. But we live in a time and in a society where there's so many forces, there's so many pressures that steer us away from that knowing, that make us pursue and get so stressed out, so anxious, so frightened about making money or more money. And we need money. We need our basic needs to be met. Basic human needs are critical to be met. But I look at the planet and I see something that kind of fills me with grief, actually. And it's this. There are about 1 billion people on this earth who are suffering from illness, disease, caused by inadequate food. They don't have enough to eat. And some of them are dying of starvation. And there's about 1 billion of those people on the planet. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, on this very same planet, at this very same moment, there are about 1 billion people who are suffering from illness and disease caused by eating too much. Too much food, too much cholesterol, too much fat, too much meat. And it takes 16 pounds of grain to make every pound of feedlot beef. Whereas it only takes 1 pound of grain to make a pot of brown rice, or millet, or buckwheat, or bread, or bake a pound of bread. And in a world where we have this gross inequality, this gross imbalance, I think living simply, Gandhi put it this way, he said, live simply so others can simply live. I would translate that a step, eat simply so others may simply eat. Eat lower on the food chain. Eat less meat. None at all, if that's possible for you. And when you do that, you cease to cause animal suffering. You don't contribute. You're not paying people to exploit and cause harm to animals. You're lowering your carbon footprint. You're diminishing your ecological footprint. You're living more lightly on the earth. You're responsible for less greenhouse gas emissions in your personal life. And that's a very important thing. And it's a dramatic thing. You actually reduce your greenhouse gas emissions more, contribute less to climate change by not eating meat than you do by driving a Prius or an electric car. It is a very powerful thing you can do. And it makes your heart feel better. And it connects you to the beautiful animals on this earth. We've been taught so many myths. And one of them is that animals are objects, that they don't feel. They don't have souls, they're not conscious, they're just things. And so we can justify that with that thinking, treating them any manner of way so long as it lowers the price per pound. But I know that's not true. And learning to live with respect for other creatures, to me, is an essential step on a spiritual path. Learning to live with respect for other people, those who think differently than you do, who have a different color skin, who have a different culture, that is an essential step on the spiritual path. Learning to respect people who are a different gender, different race, different religion, that to me is an essential step on the spiritual path. Learning to live with respect for yourself and all that a human journey entails, the suffering and the opportunities, the pain and the pleasures. To me, to embrace that all is an essential step on a spiritual path. And the more of us that walk our talk, who live what we believe, live what we really feel in our hearts is possible, should be possible. The more of us who do that, the stronger the soul force grows in our collective psyche. The stronger the power of our compassion becomes. The stronger grows our ability to make peace where there's been war, to make peace where there's been strife. The stronger grows the healing power in our bodies. The stronger grows our minds, our ability to conceive, to vision, and to realize why we are here on this earth, why we have taken birth, who we really are. Not who we've been told we are. Not who we are when we try to acquiesce to other people's expectations and please everyone at the cost of our soul. But who we are when we join with other people engage with other people in loving ways, in caring ways, in respectful ways. And that is why I began by thanking you for being part of Bliss Wisdom, and thanking you for being on this earth, for having undertaken the human journey. It is difficult. It is not easy, but it is worth it. And it can be beautiful, and you can bring your love to it. And I thank you for every way that you ever have, and all the ways yet that you will. Thank you. I'm going to take a very short break. I'll be coming back in a minute, answer questions which we'll have. See you in a moment.